And hello, everybody. Welcome back to Unslaved. We've got an amazing presentation, as always, for you once again to continue our look into consciousness studies, what's going on in the world, how everything from the past is relevant to what's happening in the present, and so much more. Michael's prepared a slideshow to go through some really valuable points for you all. So let's dig in. Michael, always good to see you, man. What are we looking at today?
Thanks. Well, sort of a important look at several of the programs we've been doing, and again, just a proper summation of why things are happening, still happening. We're in the middle of 221. Things should have been subsided by now. They haven't, and the condition in America, and try to really emphasize a couple of points that we've been making all along, which is that this is nothing new. You can scroll back to different epochs in society with every single thing that's happening, whether it's government duplicity or media or anarchists running in the streets for no reason. All of the different wrangles have all had their precedent. It's really remarkable when you look back at that. But if we go to the first slide, there's a couple of things that really, we've talked about it all before, but it's nice to be able to really condense it. And that is that Ayn Rand's premise about her subjects, heroism, these were logical, these were appropriate to our times with what's going on, and they were coherent. And yet America actually chose to ignore her. And they labeled her a lightweight. Can you believe it? And still to this day, there's really no recognition of her genius or her message. And this is a little odd because the consequences of not heeding the woman are to be seen now in plain view everywhere. So, which means that she's been wholly vindicated. And yet it passes by in the night. We'll see later that she expertly decimated any kind of socialist premise. So what are we listening to all the Fox News? And look, this is a woman who already did it inside out, top to bottom, laid it to rest, pointing out that any concept of a welfare state or, to excess, of course, and the man who, for no real good reason, go back and check out our, Death of the Grown Up, who wants to live on welfare and is encouraged to do so, is really doing what she would have looked at as, when he doesn't want to be self-reliant. He's hurting himself. I mean, it's almost remarkable that you have to mention this. According to Ayn Rand's thesis, which I said is strong, logical, and apropos to what's happening, that being is hurting himself on a psychological or existential level. Because he's born rational, right? Because of not just what did she call it? Psychoepistemology, that you are a thinking being and should always be conscious of the fact that you're a thinking being, and other beings really don't have anything like your level of conceptuality, right? So to ignore that, because that's what she means by the term heroism, that you are the top of the food chain. You have unbelievable mental skills of perspicacity and understanding and rationality. So it's not that, well, I don't use that. Just my freedom. I don't use it. She's saying then you are committing violence against yourself and against the society in which you live. You'll become a pathogen by not being heroic. You will sit and you will have underwhelming experiences when you could be really at the forefront of existence, and you're turning your back on your own potential. Now, even though our society pays lip service to some of these things, obviously those things are now under the political correct type of society that we have right now. You can turn your back on all your potential and actually be praised for it. Nobody makes it important, the values that she was talking about. You can get away with it and nobody will reprimand you. Nobody will pull you up. Nobody will be an enlightened witness that says you can do more. Nobody will coach you. So as a rational, creative being, which we are, that's our nature, when we go and heed the collective, their direction, like a sheep, it's not that we need to vote in communism. She said, you are becoming communized from within. Now, of course, we know that there's predators on the periphery of our vision, happy to see that happen. The Fabian gang, the Frankfurt gang, and all that. These are the great puppeteers. But my goodness, this thing, as I've said from day one, is far more than just some remote controlled being. These are choices that we're making within, in violation of freedom, in violation of reason. But the thing to kick off to answer that question is we're doing violence to ourselves. That's what needs to be highlighted. And although I've alluded to it time and time again, we need to do a separate program to make sure that when we discover these choices, the real categorization of people in this regard, in this existential regard, is those who do violence to themselves, harm to themselves, and those who, don't as yet. Until most people, as we see, are going to follow the trend because they don't want to be left out. They have to go to the bars, right? And they have to watch the game. I mean, come on, let's just get that jab. Let's just go and conform, right? It'll break down the will. So here's a very important existential point about authenticity and all the rest of it. And Ayn Rand is right there. She has a lot in common. No people would die before they'd link her with existentialists. Hey, it's right there on the page. It's very easy. She has a lot in common with them, as much as there are other differences as well. But government policy also caters now, as she pointed out, to this inferior type, this couch potato. And why they deemed her as a psychological and a philosophical lightweight. Can you believe that? In order so that this message that we're talking about would never reach the common purpose. It would never, reach the audience. It would never see the light of day. So she was labeled by all these duplicitous New York Times people and all of these journalists and philosophers as a lightweight because they couldn't hear the message that we're expressing right here. They don't want you to be like her. They don't want you to write books about heroes. They don't want you to think that your self-harm, the self-murdered man, he hasn't committed any crime. Right? So they allow one part, they allow you to be self-murdered and self-violated and self-harmed, but they don't want you to ever think that, oh, that's a real crime. The husk that's speaking, the social entity, the moral inferior and the psychological inferior. You're in a state of, cognitive dissonance because nobody's going to fault you for that crime because they themselves are self-murdered. It works perfectly. The self, in other words, capitalized self, imperial self, is therefore not a matter of concern because it's already dead. And then all the histrionics that you see around you is a sort of a very loud dance macabre, a big performance, a big act in order to cover up this most egregious of all crimes, the crime against the self. So like a guilty child, hey, did you smash that? Did you take, daddy's money from his wallet, right? The child replies, I'm not to blame. Somebody else did it. The next door neighbor did. The cat stole it. And today we just say everybody's doing it. Or we've learned these pathetically ridiculous talismanic memes that a Thomas Sowell and anybody else could decimate and have decimated in seconds. Social injustice. Class struggle. I'm not responsible for killing myself off. I had a bad start in life. And so the crimes against the self is the focus. The violence towards the self that becomes normalized and explained away. Centuries ago, we used religion for the very same purpose, by the way. We don't have time to explore that because in work on Otto Rank and others, that's been explored already. Religion and its supernaturalisms and whatever else. Oh, and just believing in the Bible and believing in the priest. Now it's believing in, some government forces. But the government, is involved, but they're the ones with the secret smiles because they realize that what they do is sort of a ballet. They move their chess pieces based on what we ourselves doing on the other side of the board. And, when have you ever heard anybody even mention that? It's always, as I say, everything I'm saying can be confirmed in 2 seconds because every person listening just knows that's exactly what the world is doing. Blaming external forces, blaming government is compulsive. But nobody sees it as compulsive because it's become normalized. Then we've got, as we've seen in the last many years, but it's a phenomenon that dates back a long, long, long time, the demonic crowd, right? Mobilized to its nth degree with women at the helm. But I've shown in other work, guess what? Your immersion in the crowd is actually an act of violence. It's a vehement thing. You're joining the crowd isn't just I got nothing to do today. Let me go see what the crowd is doing. Your immersion in the crowd is an act of violence against the self. It's a violent act, getting involved. You're violently getting away from selfhood. You're violently entering it with a sort of a psychic demand that I'm trusting you now, crowd, to amplify my insanity, lunacy, and neurosis, and to give me the structure that I need. So, because if you kill the core part of yourself, then you're blubber, you're jelly. So then immediately, sociologically, we can see the evidence of those kinds of people needing that structure. Then, because your immersion in the crowd has been an act of actually unperceived violence, then that makes the crowd a seething, violent, necrophilous entity, a haven for the self-murdered. And that's why we now see, if you're diagnosing it, you'll see that the rise in this crowd consciousness now has to have a reason. Why now? What's it all about? And it's all about, well, then the crowd's edict obviously is directed towards capitalism, right? The self-made man, the heroic personality type, woman or man, actually. It's masculinity. It's under attack. But don't wait for the social. Well, as a matter of fact, they are telling you, they're so loaded with feminists and pink hat nutters that actually they are telling you that masculinity and man. But when you pull out to the Rand perspective and the Le Bon perspective, it's obviously the we, the us, and the our that is now taking the place of the I. And it's the we, the us, and our consciousness that's dominating. Virtue signaling without a single stitch of actual real virtue. So the paradoxes are really, really extreme.
And that's everywhere, right? That is like what you've just said is crystal clear in the headlines of what's happening right now. People are breaking up with their friends and family over this jab, over this whole, it's become a fixation, an obsession. And isn't that a mark of something going on psychologically where people literally, first of all, they feel they have carte blanche to violate your sovereign right to have a different opinion. And second, what is this need that they have to drag you down with them? It's as if they're uncomfortable by the very presence of somebody that stands alone, the one against the many. They're uncomfortable. It makes them feel uncomfortable because maybe in a way that heroic person is calling them subconsciously to find their own heroism. And because their fear and their lack of will has got them completely embroiled in the whims of the crowd, which has all been steered by you know who, then they look at you as a threat.
Yeah, and they look at all the things that a heroic man has created. So it's not just going after a heroic man on a stereotypical level. He built the West. That kind of man built the West, and that is non-negotiable. And so they're taking it out on the statues, and all the rest of the burning, But when you look at what burning represents and all of the different, motifs you see, even the pink hats that I was talking about, they're all symbolic of something. And that's where we need to gain our sanity. As they lose sanity, as they go against the heroic. But what we're really trying to say here, just in the opening, is that they've gone against the heroic in themselves. Everybody has the potential to be, ultra feminized or to strive against it for individuation. Now as we see, they're leaving very little standing. We're getting to a very critical, if we're not there already, a critical junction in terms of our civilization. Now, civilization is not perfect. It always needs upgrades. But we're the people that said, get out there and do it then. Part of the heroism is to admit the faults in our civilization. Say, we're going to fucking fix that. We don't need protests and breaking windows and pulling down. That's highly necrophilous. And it's not, I'm the only one ever to say it, that it's not surprising that women are in vast numbers are at the helm of all of this. And you would never understand why unless you knew something about female psychology. Well, we're in total deficit. America has so ignored anything to do with sensible psychology. And you got Dr. Phil, right? And minus. Okay, we could do better. Right? But something dystopian then. Something dystopian, and that has to be analyzed, and then you get to understand the connections between the regressive, the infantile, the lunar levels, and dystopia actually are connected. That's why women are very much mobilized. Their unconscious is pricked, and they're much more, well, they're more